Despite having 6,000 hours in TF2, there are still some things that I've yet to learn. My opinions and habits have solidified a long time ago, and because of that, certain weapons have long since been overlooked or unfairly judged for a less than stellar first impression. However, as my YouTube channel's forced me to use about every weapon in the game for the videos that I make, every once in a while those opinions will shift and I'll really come to like something that I previously didn't care to use. Last year I made a video talking about some weapons that fit this criteria, but this time I wanted to focus more on full loadouts. I found that a lot of weapons that I wasn't the biggest fan of before really shine with a secondary or melee that complements their playstyle. This really opened the doors to experimentation as of recent, which in the last few months has led to me finding 3 brand new loadouts that I've really turned my opinion around on. So I want to discuss them, or more specifically, why I didn't care for them before and what got me to eventually change my mind. As with the previous video, I want to note that everything I'm about to talk about is 100% from my own personal experience. There may be some things that I discuss that are obvious to the avid users of these loadouts, however, I'm effectively experiencing them for the first time. This is just my way to talk about a game that I usually enjoy playing, not to make any broader points outside of a recommendation to try the weapons out for yourself. So with that in mind, let's discuss the loadouts that I was wrong about. A weapon I've changed my mind on dramatically recently is the black box. In my eyes, 20 healing never justified sacrificing an entire rocket in your clip for, and because of that, the black box was a weapon that I never really gave the proper time of day. However, due to a couple videos that I had to get footage for recently, I began to give the black box a fair shake for the first time in about 5 years. And I have to say that I severely underestimated the power of long-term sustain, since if you play it right, it is ridiculously hard to die with this thing equipped. In a vacuum, sure, a single instance of 20 health is not that much, but 10 to 20 health nearly every time you fire can add up very quickly, and if you look at the health you're getting back, you'll see that you often get more than your max health back from healing over the course of a life. And obviously that extra long-term sustain is amazing, but when you consider the context in which you're probably getting the healing directly, it becomes significantly better. If you're fighting an enemy, every hit you land on them is more damage they have to deal in order to win the fight. Not only can this disrupt certain damage thresholds, for instance a single rocket requires demo to land an extra pipe in order to kill you, but it's also much better at dealing with large numbers of enemies than I first gave it credit for, as long as you're willing to play slow. And that extra long-term sustain is something that I've really come to appreciate, since I've seen a lot more 10 to 20 kill streaks with the black box than I have with really any other launcher. But this is a video about loadouts, which brings me to the other more subtle thing about the black box that I've really come to appreciate. Normally I'd be running the gunboats as my secondary like any other self-respecting soldier player, so I could preserve a fair amount of health while rocket jumping. However, I found that with the black box, this really isn't as necessary as it is with the other launchers. Although this thing doesn't directly reduce self-damage, it does let you heal back the damage you take from jumping, meaning that if you're willing to put more consideration into when you're doing it instead of just doing it whenever you can, you actually never have to worry about health. This led me to really experiment with my secondary, and through that I've really come to enjoy what the banners have to offer. Like the black box, the banners are weapons that I've surprisingly not used to great extent until pretty recently. I've always known in my head that they were good, and if our team was in a sticky situation, I'd usually throw one on to help support or deny pushes. However, the black box got me to try them with the more solo playstyle I naturally tend to gravitate toward. And wow, if the black box makes you a tank, pairing it with a banner makes you an entire fortified compound. Wait, no, not that one. The buff banner more than compensates for your missing rocket, letting you dumpster groups of enemies you run into with absolute ease. It's not as reliable to charge considering the missing rocket, but it's a lot more feasible to run with the black box considering losing the sustain from the other banners isn't as impactful. As is the intent with the item set, the battalion's backup makes you a brick wall, able to heal off any damage you take and reliably break through defensive setups. Now, obviously this is the whole point of the item set, but with item sets overall being completely irrelevant nowadays, I'm always surprised when I encounter one that still synergizes perfectly. And yes, I will shamefully admit that I do have fun with the dreaded black box and conch playstyle every once in a great while. If I get stuck with a team who I can't rely on for the most basic of tasks, having overkill amounts of self-sustain can help me have fun during a losing game. Overall, though, I still prefer to stick with the mini crits because destroying groups of enemies is very satisfying. Now, is the black box on par with powerhouses like the direct hit and stock? Debatable, but I would personally say no. A single rocket's both a lot of damage and a lot of mobility, and because of that, you're relegated to a more passive playstyle to really make the black box work. And I feel like that's what turns off most soldier players from doing it, considering how popular the roamer playstyle is. Similarly, I've always considered the banners to also be a more defensive item that forces you to play slowly, which previously I wasn't the biggest fan of. However, perhaps ironically, pairing them with the most defensive primary lets you roam the map a lot more reliably since the lack of a gunboats is a lot less punishing. Overall, though, I know I don't play much soldier, but I can't believe I didn't think to pick these weapons up sooner. I'm usually someone who plays for kill streaks over playing for clips, which means that these sorts of loadouts are perfectly suited for my preferred playstyle. Another combo of weapons that I've really come to enjoy recently is the thermal thruster and the backburner. Now, I play a lot of pyro, so it's almost strange putting his weapons on this list at all, since you'd think by now I'd have a solidified opinion on all of them. But when I pick pyro, I almost exclusively use combo playstyles with stuff like the degreaser and extinguisher. The thing about combo pyro, and what's made me avoid these two weapons specifically, is that you really need the faster switch speed from the degreaser and some sort of damaging secondary to make them work optimally. You can try to work in the jetpack or backburner, but the lack of range and expensive air blasts really hampers an important aspect of your gameplay. So naturally, I prefer to avoid using either of these weapons individually since they never really offer me anything that I want. However, when you pair them together, you get an extremely fun and mobile playstyle that I've never tried to great extent until fairly recently. The core concept behind it is as straightforward as it gets. You jetpack in, burn everyone to a crisp, and then if you manage to survive, jetpack out. But even beyond the obvious brain-dead playstyle of landing on people's heads, the thermal thruster and Backburner have incredible synergy in general, much more than I gave him credit for years. The Backburner is a very positionally dependent weapon if you want to make the most use out of its upsides. With most other secondaries though, your options of getting into the optimal position are fairly limited. You can try to flank with something like the detonator, but on top of not covering much long-term horizontal distance, the toll it takes on your health is rather strenuous. This is part of the reason that I never cared to use the Backburner. Your options to actually get the crits reliably were to either hide in a corner or just to run and hope nobody sees you, neither of which I consider to be very fun. With the thermal thruster though, you can cover huge distances nearly instantly, meaning that getting behind the enemy is much faster and more reliable than with any other secondary. Not to mention, the thermal thruster lets you remove one of the biggest weaknesses of flamethrower-centric loadouts of closing the gap between you and the enemy, and it does this absolutely effortlessly. With a little bit of luck, you can decimate people before they even have the chance to react to what's happening. Now, will you flawlessly pull off ambush plays like this every single time? I mean, no. Sometimes their god-tier sniper or direct-hit soldier will destroy you as you're trying to do something cool, and other times the enemy team will be aware enough to take care of you before you have a chance to become a problem, even if you do get into position. But when the stars align, this loadout lets you become a flanking machine, mowing everyone down with Backburner crits and flying away from the scene of the crime like it never happened. However, out of everything these weapons have to offer, I would say the thing that I was wrong about most is how fun the thermal thruster actually is. I've always been under the impression that it was more of a gimmick for newer players, since on top of being incredibly easy to use compared to blast jumping, it completely confines your damage to WM1ing. And while I'd still generally rather combo than just rely on flames, being able to move around fluidly as pyro is much more fun than I ever gave it credit for. And honestly, the holster animation isn't as bad as I initially thought. It's still not ideal, but if you make wider jumps, you can very easily buffer a weapon switch and have your flamethrower out by the time you land. Overall, I would consider it one of the few truly underrated weapons this game has to offer, and I can't wait to try it out in a wider variety of loadouts. At the end of the day, I still do prefer playing combo pyro, as the insane stuff you can pull off means that a skilled pyro will get a lot more value out of it in general. However, I can't deny that landing on random groups of people and getting 5 free kills is a fun way to play the game if I don't particularly feel like trying. Rather ironic that the bird YouTuber is just now discovering how fun flying and dive bombing can be. The final combo of weapons that I've had a ton of fun experimenting with recently is the Widowmaker and Eureka effect. I know engineering is not exactly a new play style, but somehow this one slipped under the radar for me for years. I recently got around to trying it, and oh my god, this play style is so stupid it's amazing. So, first of all, the Widowmaker. The reason I never used the Widowmaker in the past is because I've always preferred the mental flexibility the stock shotgun offers. Beef a shot or decide to tack on some chip damage with stock? No sweat, you got 35 more shells that reload pretty quickly. Do that with the Widowmaker though, and you've just wasted 15% of your most valuable resource. That was one of the hardest parts of using the Widowmaker at first, actually having trigger discipline instead of just shooting whatever I want. But with good aim and metal management, I've really come to enjoy the insane combat capability this thing has to offer. Dealing with multiple enemies is a breeze thanks to not having to reload, and even if you don't play perfectly, you're always guaranteed half your metal back if you're able to secure the kill. The real star of the show here though, and the reason that I started using the Widowmaker, is the Eureka effect. Being able to put down a beacon that you can teleport to whenever you want is hilariously stupid if you're smart with it. In fact, you don't even have to put it behind enemy lines or do anything cheesy to get insane use out of it. Just having a teleporter that both the engineer and his teammates can use at the same time is massive for getting people back to the fight faster. That being said though, the cheesy stuff does exist, and good god, if you play your cards right, this thing has the potential to derail the entire game. So there are two pretty broken things that I found about the Eureka effect while messing around with it. Number one, as long as your teleporter exists, this thing lets you effectively have infinite healing and metal. This is obviously well known for Nest, with multiple rollout tutorials existing that show you how to get the most use out of your setup time. However, even in the middle of combat, with a moderate amount of safety and about 3 seconds to spare, you can get a quick resupply off while you're behind enemy lines. This means that on top of being able to repeatedly flank, you never have to worry about health or ammo as long as you can occasionally spare the 3 seconds it takes to go through the animation. And number two, by far the most stupid thing about this wrench, for some reason nearly everything about the Eureka effect is tailor-made for stealth. And an active teleporter is hard to spot and completely silent, and the engineer's teleporting animation only shows the particles and noise where you teleport from and not on the exit. Basically, unless you directly come across the hidden teleporter, which is surprisingly hard to do, there are almost no other context clues of where you've hidden it or when the engineer's taking it. Why they made the weapon like this, one can only guess, but it is hilarious how often this thing lets you get away with downright stupid plays. And on top of all of that, TF2 lets dead engineers spectate their teleporter exits, meaning that on top of having a free camera within enemy lines, you'll immediately know if someone's trying to camp it. Other than that though, I think the benefits of this combo are pretty self-explanatory. Place a teleporter somewhere stupid, warp to it while no one's looking, and clear out the entire back line. This is among the strategies that I consider to be unreasonably effective in most lobbies. Why people rarely turn around is beyond me, but frankly frankly, that makes it all the more fun. So anyway, those were loadouts that I've recently had my opinion completely shift on. As I start to get burnout from casual and potentially even TF2 as a whole, it's very nice to have some new toys to play around with every once in a while. Novelty is a great way to renew my interest in the game, and having fun strategies like this really amps it up. If you know of any other weapons you think I should give another go, feel free to let me know what it is and why you like using it. Who knows, maybe your unique perspective will be the one to get me to dust off an item I've not touched in years and perhaps even enjoy myself. What I'm hoping you enjoyed was this video, in which case your like is appreciated, and most importantly, have a good one.